you said something earlier about reporting, suggestions, ideas that Kellen Moore came in number 2. Joe Person of The Athletic, who's covered the Panthers for years, has pushed back against that and said there was no pecking order behind Frank Reich. And maybe that is what the Panthers are trying to get out there in advance of the storm that is definitely coming. And folks, the storm is coming. Steve Wilks, I firmly believe, and it doesn't take a keen ability to read between the lines of the statement that was issued by Doug Wigdor, the lawyer who represents Brian Flores, Ray Horton, and Steve Wilks in their landmark racial discrimination case against the NFL. Minutes after Frank Reich became the head coach of the Panthers and Steve Wilks didn't, a very scathing statement was issued on behalf of Wilks by Doug Wigdor that makes it clear to me that Wilks is going to take action through Wigdor against David Tepper and the Panthers. We are shocked and disturbed that after the incredible job, and that's the word that David Tepper used, if he does an incredible job, he'll be in consideration. The incredible job Coach Wilks did as the interim coach, including bringing the team back into playoff contention and garnering the support of the players and fans, that he was passed over for the head coach position by David Tepper. The statement goes on to say that there is a legitimate race problem in the NFL, and we can assure you that we will have more to say in the coming days. More to say in the coming days, and it will be said in the form of 8.5 by 11-inch paper with 12-point font. Times New Roman is the standard in the legal industry, and it will be joining the Carolina Panthers to the litigation that includes the NFL, the Dolphins, the Texans, the Broncos, the Giants, the Titans, the Cardinals. The Panthers are now going to be part of that, with the argument being, Peter, that Steve Wilks was passed over for 2 reasons. And they'll figure it all out in the discovery process. Reason 1, because he's black. Reason 2, because he has sued club oligarch, because he's a troublemaker. He's undesirable. It's retaliation. And there's so many people out there that think that's okay. Well, why would you want to hire somebody who sued you? Yeah, that's part of the legal protection for the people who stand up for themselves. You can't smack them down because you don't like the fact that they're standing up for themselves. It makes it even more important to give someone like that a fair shake so you don't create the impression that you just are shunning someone who is costing your little billionaires club money. Those are going to be the 2 arguments, I firmly believe, and in the coming days, we will find out more.
I think the biggest argument that Steve Wilks has is that this was a forlorn team. This was a team on the way to 2-15. You know, this was a team that Steve Wilks took over 5 or 6 weeks into the season and basically made respectable. And right away, he did stuff that really marked the kind of tenure he was going to have, and that is when he basically told Scotty Anderson to go in the locker room when he was, being insubordinate on the sidelines, and so or Robbie Anderson, excuse me, and so I think he did exactly what you would want to do. And I mean, look, you could easily argue that he should have gotten the job, definitely deserved the job. And I think the defense by the Panthers is going to be very, very simple. We wanted a guy to develop a quarterback so that we will get off this go-round of misery that we have been on at quarterback since Cam Newton, basically since soon after Cam Newton's MVP year, whatever. That was 2015. The next couple of years, everything was fine. But then after that, they've just been, running around in circles trying to fix their quarterback situation. So to me, that's going to be their defense. And, look, it's an ugly situation for the league without any question that Steve Wilks didn't get this job. And it's going to come down to, I think any sort of legal action in this case is going to come down to what is provable. And I think it's going to be hard to prove anything other than same old NFL. So I don't know what kind of relief they're going to be able to get for it, Mike. You would have a much better idea about that than I would.
These cases are always incredibly difficult to prove. I spent hours and hours and hours, weeks, months, years, fighting on behalf of individuals who had lost their jobs for reasons that they and I believed were in violation of the various federal, state, and local laws that provide protection against discrimination, retaliation for a wide variety. We know about race, gender, age, religion, etc., but there are certain protections that apply to someone who works in an industry where it's very important that you do things the right way because the stuff you're making goes into, for example, jet engines. And if somebody's not doing the job right and somebody else says something and they get in trouble over that and lose their job over that, they have protection. And the problem in all those cases is proving it, because nobody ever gets on the witness stand and says, you got me. I did it. I ordered the code red. You have to prove the case through circumstantial evidence, and you have to also aggressively question the decision makers. So, Peter, the antenna that went up for me, and I don't want to turn this into a 2-hour continuing legal education class, but I want people to understand how this works. My antenna went up when you said their best defense is they want an offensive coach to develop the quarterback that they are determined to get. Because when David Tepper was asked on October 10 about Steve Wilks potentially keeping the job, he didn't say, well, you know, one of the factors will be, do we want an offensive coach to develop a quarterback? Is that what we decide to do? That will be a relevant factor. He didn't say that. What he said was, as to Steve Wilks, he's in a position to be in consideration for that position. I had a talk with Steve. No promises were made, but if he does an incredible job, he has to be in consideration. Now, you get into parsing of words, you get into back and forth, but that's just an example. David Tepper, at some point, who has the money and the power in his own personal realm to submit to no authority other than his own, he's going to have to be Colonel Nathan Jessup on that witness stand. While Tom Cruise says, I want the truth, you can't handle the truth, you're damn right I did. That's going to play out for David Tepper at some point, Peter. Regardless of how it goes, he's going to get a ticket to that party.
You know what he didn't say? He didn't say, if he does an incredible job, I'm giving him the head coaching job. I believe his words were, as you just quoted,
I know.
If he does an incredible job, he'll be in consideration for the job. Right? Is that right? And wasn't he in consideration?
You're right. But was he in consideration? See, that's this thing devolves into he said, she said, who's telling the truth, who's not telling the truth. How can you otherwise undermine a witness's credibility so you can say to the jury, why are you believing him when he says this? Why are you believing anything these people say? That's where it all becomes very interesting, very expensive, and very dangerous for the NFL. And it all hinges on the threshold matter that nearly a year after the case was filed still hasn't been resolved, Peter. And it's the most important question in the entire case. Where is it going to be resolved? Is it going to be resolved in open court, where it's a completely fair balance for both sides, or is it going to end up in arbitration presided over by the NFL, something I refer to, I'm sure to the chagrin of 345 Park Avenue, as the league's secret rigged kangaroo court? And I call it that because that's exactly what it is. When the person who is hired and paid by the 32 owners is the one resolving these disputes where claims are being made against the people who are paying the commissioner, kind of hard to get a fair shake if you're the individual who, just this conversation we're having illustrates how difficult it is for the individual to push back against whatever narrative the team is going to put forward. When the commissioner, who's on the payroll of the teams, is the one making the decision, he's going to be inclined to listen to them and accept their version of it.
Let me ask you this question. So if this does go to open court, which gives Steve Wilks and his attorneys obviously a much better opportunity, how would this, what would be the case of Steve Wilks when arguing that going 6-6 in this scenario and taking a bad team and nearly winning the division should be and should be enough to keep the job, and therefore it should be enforced that they should be forced to keep me or to pay. It's going to be too late by then, but it's going to be too late then. But how much damages should they pay? I mean, what is going to be his best case?
Well, there's two ways to look at it, and one becomes very difficult to get your arms around and thus to get the jury's brain around. The idea that Steve Wilks was the better option than Frank Reich. And it's one thing to convince the jury that they would have hired Steve Wilks, and anyone objectively looking at this would have hired Steve Wilks. The easier approach, not that it's easy, but a lot of times what you do is you delve into the question, Peter, of whether it was all rigged from the get-go, whether or not Steve Wilks actually got fair consideration, whether or not the fix was in. And that's why something that we pointed out last night that seems very trivial and seems very irrelevant on the surface is going to become a major focus of discovery once this case goes forward, if it ever goes forward. Because again, we're nearly a year in and we don't know where in the hell it's going to go forward. That's an example of how slowly these things go. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.